brutal riffs, how to make brutal black metal guitar riffs, I found that rhythm is the most important thing when creating brutal riffs. And it's generally making sure that all the chord changes are on beats or at the beginning of the bars. And let me explain. So let's just take a random chord progression here. Let's go with E, E flat, and C. Okay, so we can just take those three chords, and depending on the speed and how we play it and when we play the chord change, we can make it brutal. So for example, if we were to draw every chord out for like a bar, to me it's heavy, but it's not brutal. It's more like, for me, brutality is like that kind of crushing riffs that are almost overwhelming for the listener. I'm going to change each chord on every beat. So I'm going to play E, E flat, C, then back to E flat. So it's going to be in every bar, 1, 2, 3, 4, like that. See, now that makes something far more brutal, to my ears anyway, and my understanding and the way I perceive brutality. Tempo is a part of making something brutal or not, because if I were to play at about the 150, 160, 170 kind of BPM, to me that's not brutal enough. Like, I need far more speed for it to be brutal. Just to make it a bit more crushing and a bit more energetic. It's got to have energy, it's got to have like a force behind it, it's got to feel like a big wall of sound. It doesn't necessarily have to be technical, but it does need to show off some kind of feeling, some emotion behind it as well, because at that kind of speed you are far more involved with the music, as opposed if it were on a slower tempo. Like, again, I'll play the same riff again, slowly, and then quickly. See, piece of cake, but now... there, it takes a lot more out of you, and you just kind of feel the music a lot more. It's hard to explain something by feeling, but I think you can probably hear it as well, that there's a lot more going on, there's a more kind of ferocity in the music as well. So that's one way to make something brutal. First of all, speed, and making sure the chord changes are generally at the beginning of the bars or on the beat. Sometimes you can give it a bit more time. So let's take another chord progression now. So let's do E, B, C, and B flat here. For example, let's do something a bit more slower now, but still make it brutal. So there's a fine point to making something brutal and also groovy at the same time, because when the music's slower, you can generally make more groovy riffs, and you can still make it brutal with the inclusion of certain rhythms and ways of playing certain chords. Now, in all of my YouTube videos, I think I've probably played these inverted power chords here, where I play a normal B power chord here, 2 on A, 4 on E. Added note is the 2nd fret on the low E. So the root note is still a B, the main note is still a B, but the lowest note is F sharp, which is still the 5th of B. That's the 5th, but here we're playing at the bottom, so we get a thicker sound. And by using this chord, we can build brutality, because it's a very, very, very heavy sounding chord. And even at this slow speed, we need to add some rhythms, because it's just... It's still kind of brutal, it's more like slam death metal kind of thing, but it's not the kind of brutality that I'm looking for. I want a bit more kind of 16th note rhythm. just adding some rhythms and some cool 16th note rhythmic patterns can make your riff quite brutal. Similar to how Dimmu Borgir did it on the Puritanical album, you know, with the Kings of the Carnival Creation riff. And Puritania. You know, those kind of rhythms that really give the music a lot more energy, building that aggression, even when it's slower, because you've still got this speed element with the right hand. So it's even taking a little bit from the death metal genre, and that is another way you can make your black metal more brutal, because it's just sometimes better than just, you know, these like 2-note dyad riffs, because sometimes they're not really that brutal, you know. You know, to me, that's not brutal. If I were to make those chords brutal, I don't know, something like that maybe. Just add a bit more kind of thrash rhythms and a bit more aggression into the music. And that's probably the main thing with brutality. It's got to be aggressive. It can be fast or slow. That medium 150 to like 170-ish tempo is like not the sweetest point for like brutal riffs. It's generally on like the 130 or below and like 190 upwards, where you can really just have like, you know, fast blast beats and aggressive riffs. So I guess as a summary for brutal riffing, if you just find evil chord changes, so refer back to my evil chord changes lessons and some like the intervals, and even just like sometimes take power chords or just chord progressions you like, and add some like thrash rhythms in there. Play around with some of the rhythms. Maybe use Guitar Pro, maybe just experiment yourself and start recording and find how to make your riffs more brutal rhythmically. Focus on chord changes at the beginning of every bar or the beginning of every beat, depending on the tempo and what type of riff it is as well. And don't be afraid to add like hammer-ons and pull-offs in the middle of riffs, because it sounds kind of cool. Like we take the Sculpture of Flesh. You know, riffs like that where the hammer-ons and the pull-offs can make something even more aggressive. For me anyway, that's how I make brutal riffs. It's generally chord changes on the beat or the beginning of the bar, thick heavy chords, or general little riffs with like hammer-ons and pull-offs. There's so many ways to do it. It's just as a baseline, the chord changes should really just be on the beat, and you should focus more on ferocity and more on how it's played rather than what you play.